Hey, Professor Hitch here, and today I want to talk to you about deconstructive literary theory. So let's go. For many of us who consider ourselves lovers of literature, phrases such as the random play of signifiers or the transcendental signified evoke a kind of fear and loathing that you normally only find in a math class. To be clear, signifiers and signified make up a great portion of deconstructive literary theory, to be discussed soon. Nevertheless, deconstruction has a good deal to offer. It can improve our ability to think critically and to see more readily the ways in which our experience is determined by ideologies of which we are unaware, because they are built into our language. In our daily lives, most of us take for granted that language works the way it does. By contrast, deconstruction theories of language is based on the belief that language is much more slippery and ambiguous than we realize. Let's take a look at some of these examples. Time flies like an arrow. When I say that, what you hear is that time passes quickly and in one direction. However, what if time is a verb and not a noun? Time as in, I am keeping time of how fast you're going. Time as in, I'm going to time how long you run this track. Time flies. Object this time, like an arrow, adverbial clause. What you're asking now is, how fast can that bug fly? That is a completely different meaning to the same 5 words. Let's take a look at these examples for deconstructing emphasis. President Reagan says the Marines do not have to go to El Salvador. He's implying that he's lying. President Reagan says the Marines do not have to go to El Salvador. He's correcting a false rumor. President Reagan says the Marines do not have to go to El Salvador, implying that some other group has to go. President Reagan says the Marines do not have to go to El Salvador, implying that another person may have said the Marines do have to go. President Reagan says the Marines do not have to go to El Salvador, implying that perhaps they can go if they want to. President Reagan says the Marines do not have to go to El Salvador, implying that perhaps they have to go somewhere else. 6 sentences, all the same words, completely different meanings. That is what deconstructive literary theory is all about. So let's take a look at the basic elements of communication. The basic formula is sign equals signifier plus signified. Signifier meaning sound, image, gesture, something physical. Signified meaning concept to which the signifier refers. Let's take a look at the word rose. The actual letters R-O-S-E are signifiers. They're physical things. You see them on the screen. The signified, your symbolic construction of the flower, is going to be an image in your head, whatever you think of when you think of a rose. Now, note the influence of reader response theory here. There is no universal signified. When I say rose, I'm thinking of a badass black rose, but that might not be what you're thinking of as you're watching this video. Only the reader's conception of what the flower is, looks like, smells, and so on is what's important. That's exactly reader response theory. This is what makes language such a complicated and uncertain thing. So, according to deconstruction then, the word tree never really reaches the point where it refers to a single concept. What happens is, when I say tree, I have a mental image that leads to more mental images. So I say tree, I think weeping willow tree. But when I think weeping willow tree, I think about an experience that I had when I was 5 years old. When I think about an experience I had, I think about childhood. That chain keeps going forever. Which is how in a story somebody can say the word tree and it can mean something completely different than the actual tree itself. That is also true for you, the viewer. As you're thinking of the word tree, a series of images are coming into your head, and we never actually quite land on the concept tree. So what does this do for deconstruction? Well, claims that language is non-referential because it refers to neither the things in the world nor our concepts of things, but only to the play of signifiers of which language itself consists. Basically, language isn't referring to anything, it's just referring to ideas. For example, a tree isn't a tree, but it's everything that everyone associates with trees. Apples, orchards, picnics, shade, sun, grass, giving, so on. Language is ideology, so what you have to understand is if the previous slide is true, how we see and understand ourselves and the world is thus governed by language with which we are taught to see them. That is, language mediates our experience. And for deconstruction, language is wholly ideological. It consists entirely of the numerous conflicting dynamic ideologies operating at any given point in time in any given culture. This is an example of ideology which may or may not stick and help you understand how language is what you're taught. Our use of the word slut for a woman who sleeps with many men and the word stud for a man who sleeps with many women reveals and perpetuates the cultural belief that sexual relations with multiple partners should be a source of shame for women and a source of pride for men. Why do we call women sluts? Wow, what a loaded question. Well, I can tell you this. That is a word we learn. That is a word that culture uses, and that is a word that we see other people using, and therefore we use the word that they're using. And what deconstructive literary theory is attempting to teach is that these words have ideas in them. These words are not just words, they have a whole history behind them that goes into the actual utterance of the word itself. So, how does this work for deconstructing the world? Well, all systems of Western philosophy derive from and are organized around one grounding principle from which we believe we can figure out the meaning of existence. For some thinkers, the ground of being is some cosmic principle of order or harmony. For others, the grounding principle is the rational thought engaged in the act of self-reflection, as illustrated by Descartes' cogito ergo sum. For deconstructionists, the world is deconstructed by language. Because human beings are constituted by language, they too are texts. Isn't that interesting? In other words, deconstruction's theory of language has implications for subjectivity, for what it means to be human. Considering our experience of ourselves and our world is produced by the language we speak, and because all language is unstable, ambiguous, force fields of competing ideologies, the self-image of a stable identity that many of us have is just a comforting self-delusion. In other words, if we establish that language is unstable, and I think we have. We saw 6 different examples of Ronald Reagan sending the Marines to El Salvador that all meant different things. Language is unstable. If we can agree that language is unstable, if we can agree that language is how we think about the world, if we can agree that how we think about the world is how we ultimately construct our identity, start to connect the dots, people. Our identities are a lot more unstable than we really give them credit for. So, how does this apply to deconstructing literature? For deconstruction, you must know 3 things. 1, language is dynamic, ambiguous, and unstable. 2, existence has no center, no stable meaning, no fixed ground. And 3, human beings are fragmented battlegrounds for competing ideologies whose only identities are the ones we invent and choose to believe. So what are the purposes and goals of deconstructing literary texts? Well, purpose number 1 is to reveal the text's undecidability, its ambiguity. Or 2, to reveal the complex operations of the ideologies of which the text is constructed. This is similar, although not identical, to Marxist literary theory. Goals, however, are much more vast. Goal number 1, Know all the various interpretations the text seems to offer. Goal 2, show the ways in which the interpretations conflict with one another. Goal 3, show how these conflicts produce yet even more interpretations, which produce new conflicts, which produce new interpretations. And step 4, use steps 1, 2, and 3 to argue for the text's undecidability. What are some questions that deconstructive critics ask about literary texts? Question 1. How can we use various conflicting interpretations a text produces, or find the various ways in which the text doesn't answer some of the questions it seems to answer, to demonstrate the instability of language and the undecidability of meaning? Number 2, what ideology does the text seem to promote? What is its main theme, and how does the conflicting evidence in the text show the limitations of that ideology? In other words, if the words that we use and the words we read on the page are just presentations of ideas, that a word refers to one idea and that idea refers to another idea, deconstructive critics focus on what those hidden ideas are. In a way, it's actually quite simple once you get past the terminology. And there you go. That has been your basic introduction to deconstructive literary theory. I hope this was helpful.